Greetings, friends of liberty. You catch me yet again underway in the TARDIS, by this time having briefly programmed it to Czechoslovakia, 1870, to visit and talk with the founder of the science of genetics, the Austrian monk Gregor Mendel. Given that Gregor was understandably discouraged that his pioneering theory hadn't gotten any scientific attention in the 4 years since he had presented it in 1866, upon meeting with him I assured him that the world would discover his theory and its great value. He appeared comforted by my communication, and so I didn't have the heart to tell him that it would take yet another 30 years. But now again, to assume my regional accent and to the subject at hand. As you may know from some of my recent book reviews, the number of authors who approach grasping the actual origins of political correctness and wokeness is vanishingly small. In this video, we shall briefly examine the paper of an author who actually understands part of this causal equation. As she puts it, culture can affect law, but law can affect culture too. Exactly right. Who is this rare species? Almost as rare as the elusive ivory-billed woodpecker, last reported from the swamps of East Arkansas in 2004. None other than legal scholar Gail Heriot, presently professor at the University of San Diego, author of over 15 legal papers and of 2 chapters in the book entitled A Dubious Expediency, which focuses on the harms of affirmative action. In February of this year, Ms. Heriot published the 62-page paper, The Roots of Wokeness, Title VII Damage Remedies as Potential Drivers of Attitudes Towards Identity Politics and Free Expression. I would give the paper an A-, primarily because, at least in part, she identifies one of the 3 major causes of the rise of political correctness and wokeness in the U.S. What Ms. Heriot is arguing is that after the Civil Rights Act of 1991 was passed, both the frequency and the amount of damages for infractions of Title VII were increased, and that this is, as her title indicates, a potential driver of the rise of woke attitudes and presumably woke ideology. So what should we say of this paper? First, I'd say that her writing style is crystal clear, and insofar as I can judge, her purely legal analysis and reasoning first-rate concerning the constitutionality and soundness of many legal rulings and rationales. But I would raise the following 3 points. The first is not whether Ms. Heriot is right, but whether, even if she's right, there aren't other causes of wokeness. And if there are, how strong are these other causes comparatively? As I argued in my video, The Actual Cause of Political Correctness, short version, there almost certainly are other causes, these being the whole university system, which, being perverted by governmental influence and money, has taught liberal, and then politically correct, and then woke ideology at least since World War II. How strong would these other influences be? Before 1991 and continuing after, I would roughly estimate at 2/3 or even 3/4 of the total causal mix. These other causes. Ms. Heriot herself indicates the likelihood or possibility of other causes being present. Now to the second issue, and this is whether the increased frequency in punishments after 1991 changed not just the behavior, but the ideas of people, as she's arguing. So on the one hand, I agree that the increased liability for and probability of an adverse Title VII judgment after 1991 increased the tendency of businesses to police the behavior of their male employees in the office, and thus change their behavior. But did it change their ideas and identity to become more woke? No, in this case, the opposite, as Ms. Heriot herself indicates on numerous occasions. But did it maybe encourage the man-hating women in the office, emboldened to make cutting jokes and carry around coffee cups with derogatory slogans, with the result that these women were more motivated to act in a more biased fashion against men? Quite possibly. At one point on page 43, Miss Heriot appears to make a similar argument. And so everyone agrees attitudes change, but it's not clear, even while behavior has become compliant with woke rules, what the net result ideologically is due to this cause. Is it more woke beliefs and not just behavioral compliance? Thirdly and finally, a serious problem. Miss Heriot believes that a minimal Title VII that doesn't use disparate impact is justified, and apparently also a limited version of Title IX. What this means is that she believes in morals legislation, in governmental paternalism to a degree, and that regarding their own property, racists do not have the natural right to be racist with their own stuff. This is false, since the whole point of freedom is that you have the right to be wrong, again, with your own stuff. And so she would visit violence upon the nonviolent to better humanity. So I would ask, has any morals legislation ever worked in all of human history? No. From modern drug wars, creating incredibly rich and powerful drug cartels, to alcohol prohibition in the U.S., doubling the crime rate and blinding drinkers with bad alcohol in speakeasies, to the futile attempts at outlawing prostitution, which create the counterproductive results of enabling human trafficking and increasing disease, to attempts to outlaw gambling, which would outlaw poker and betting on football games. Moral legislation never works, but she's saying it would here. So why is she wrong? Why can't it work to punish people for being racist? For the following reasons. First, if people don't give a verbal indication, but we can only evaluate their actions, there is often no way to discover whether the person or company is racist. Discovering whether the thought crime of racism actually occurred is much more difficult than with actual crimes like murder and theft. And many times, we make correct judgments in our own life based on our feelings or our intuitions, and it's impossible to articulate why that is. In the same way, it's also impossible for a judge judging us to know whether we did something because of racism or instead because of a legitimate, unarticulated reason. So let's say, for example, that a person hates Southerners, but not blacks, and so refuses to hire a black Southerner. Would any judge be able to tell what his real reason was? And would the judge then claim that hating a person because he's a Southerner is not as bad? That's the logic of Miss Heriot's argument. Unless, perhaps, she wants to try to outlaw both? But then, why stop there? Why not try to outlaw all hate? Why not become totalitarian? If it works with racism, why wouldn't it work with any other moral fault? With murder or theft, the act itself makes you guilty. But there's no necessity for anything you do being motivated by racist reasons, and thus proving it is beyond a reasonable doubt by the action alone is not possible. In fact, one of the rationalizing functions of quotas that come with banning disparate impact tests is to give judges the appearance of having an external, seemingly objective criterion that they can use as an excuse for finding racism in institutions when in fact disparate impact proves nothing racist. Secondly, if correcting racism were voluntary, by allowing people to hire or fire blacks by choice, you'd end up rewarding both the best white people by their voluntarily being able to discover and hire the best black people they can find, and thus the best black job candidates. But if you try to force the issue, this won't happen. Thirdly, you're treating the racists as less than human, which is tempting but wrong, since they've done nothing violent to others. To treat nonviolent people with violence is something the Founding Fathers were wise enough to reject throughout the Constitution. Fourthly and finally, note that some people who aren't racist, such as myself, will oppose morals legislation on principle because the principle of nonviolence is worth defending. In other words, there are plenty of people out there who don't want to be forced to do the right thing, even if they would do it anyway. They realize that it's their choice, not Miss Heriot's, and understand that the principle of nonviolence is worth defending. They know that when you force the issue, you objectively harm people. In summary, the very existence of Title VII and its agency of enforcement, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is in fact a crime of the state perpetrated on people innocent of committing violence. It is, in fact, although liberals will laugh, an act of oppression against innocent people. Thus, Miss Heriot would violate the spirit of our Constitution and the natural civil liberties of free association and expression of both racist and non-racist Americans in a counterproductive attempt to achieve a worthwhile goal. That's her biggest mistake in this otherwise excellent paper. In conclusion, I thank you all for being willing to think seriously about the idea that law creates culture and also whether morals legislation can ever work, and bid you well. I remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.